Going to start today, the first session. I'm waiting. Oscar, espero, vale. Ay, madre. So we're starting the first session of the third day, Super Sharing Cities stand-up programming thing. And today we have the honor to be able to deliver and to experience a lab, a very different one, a design justice lab with Sasha, with Elena, with Marta, and with Mayo. I don't know why you are not here, please. and with myself. I think that we all deserve a small little presentation, and we're going to explain also what the design justice principles are. And after that, we're going to host a kind of hackathon with nice activities, and we will all learn a lot about design justice and sharing cities. So now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm extremely happy to be here with such a great company. I'm particularly very happy to see Sasha, Constanza Shock here with us in Barcelona. I know Sasha for many years already, 20 years perhaps. Yeah, from the global justice, global resistance movement in the late 90s, early 2000, in which the first website to be based on open publication in the media started in the mobilizations against the World Trade Organization in Seattle. And since then, we have been keeping a conversation and an exchange and sharing this path. And here we are today in the middle of the Smart City Expo World Congress in a stand partly organized by the university and partly organized by the a city council, Barcelona City Council. Well, who would say that 20 years ago? But here we are. And over the years, there has been a progression and evolution in the political perspective and goal. But here today, that's also very important. We are about putting the glasses of design justice and analyze what it means to be here, what it means the technology from a design justice perspective or public policies on the case of sharing city declaration and the experience we are doing here. So with this, I would like to just say welcome to Sasha and just start it.
Gracias, Mayo. Thank you. I guess I'm supposed to speak in English, so I will do that instead of Spanish. I'm really happy to be here. Like Mayo said, who would have thought that when we met each other and we were dealing with, riot cops and independent publishing with free, libre, open source software in the heyday of that stage of the global justice movement, that then we would find our way through different kinds of institutions. But here we are. So I'm really excited for this today. We're really going to spend most of the time today doing something hands-on because design justice is something that we make together rather than that we just kind of talk about. It's easy to talk about principles, and we will do that a little bit here. And I guess one of my goals is to give you a little bit of a sense of where the Design Justice Network came from and both some of the practical and theoretical underpinnings of this work that we've been doing. But really, we're going to spend some time today thinking about what these principles mean in the context of a space like this that's supposed to be about the future of urban space, the future of cities, but seems to largely be about replicating a top-down neoliberal corporate semi-fascist vision of what it means to gather people's data and use it to feed automated decision-making systems that we already know are going to replicate what Black feminist scholar Patricia Hill Collins calls the Matrix of Domination, which is the intersection of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, cisnormativity, capitalism, ableism, and settler colonialism. These interlocking systems of structural and historical oppression that show up in our lives in different ways depending on our vantage point within the matrix of domination, but that many of the automated systems that we see around us are designed to unthinkingly reproduce in many cases. So we're going to get into it a little bit later. We're going to do some field work today. We're going to walk around the space and we're going to gather examples and critique them and come back and talk together about what we find in this kind of space. But before we get into all of that, I'm going to share a little bit about the design justice principles and the network and where it comes from. And then after that, I guess we're going to hear about what's been happening with the design justice network in the Mediterranean region, because it's a network, so it's not a top-down structure. We have principles that guide us, but people are developing localized visions of what the work looks like. So we're going to hear about that in a moment. But I guess, yeah, I'll start a little bit by sharing a bit about the network principles and some of the background. So design justice really is it's a number of things, right? It's a theoretical framework for thinking about how design, and by design we mean people planning and then executing things. So we're not only talking about visual design, the visual language of design, although that might be included, but we're also interested in thinking about the design of objects, of images, of the built environment, of systems and processes. So there are people in the Design Justice Network who come from graphic design, from industrial design, from architecture, from landscape, architecture, from city planning, from actually just yesterday, someone who is a nurse practitioner and inventor wrote to us to say that there's a whole group of nurses who are getting involved in thinking about what design justice means for the invention of the development of medical devices, from nurses who are often people who are most close to caregiving in a hospital context. So it's a set of ideas about how we design and build and make things and make the world together. And in particular, design justice is interested in how design can either reproduce or challenge the matrix of domination. And again, the matrix of domination is this term created by black feminist scholars in the United States context, in particular Patricia Hill Collins, who wrote about race, class, and gender as interlocking systems of oppression, but we could expand that and we would talk about race, class, gender, ability, location within the global system of settler colonialism and indigenous resistance. And you can add additional vectors of structural and historical inequality to that. And the way that they operate together and position us within them as particular subjects, as particular bodies, is we're concerned with how design reproduces or challenges the matrix of domination in everything from interface design to the built environment to representation through visual language and so on and so forth. That's sort of like some of the theoretical ideas that we work with, which of course come out of histories and legacies of struggle and practice of black feminist movement building, and the way that that has interwoven with and been core to so many other struggles. Again, this is in the US context, but we're exploring how it applies in other locations as well with local collaborators. So in addition to being a lens or a way of thinking about how design processes work and function to reproduce or challenge oppression, design justice it's in particular concerned with how benefits and harms of designed objects, systems, interfaces, how do those benefits and harms get distributed along the lines of the matrix of domination, right? So, for example, we could talk about a pretrial risk assessment system, which is widely being used and deployed in the United States. I'm not sure what if that's happening here yet, but basically when you've been arrested and you show up in court in the US, in many places, what happens is you will be run through an automated decision-making system, which will is basically a machine learning tool that's been trained to produce a risk score about whether you are likely to reoffend or not, your recidivism risk rate. And the judge will take that score into account when deciding whether to detain you without release prior to your trial, or whether to let you go free until the date of your trial. Now, we could talk about why is it that anybody is placed in cages at all from a prison abolitionist perspective. We could also talk about why is it that anybody is held in a cage prior to even going through a trial. You don't even have to be a prison abolitionist to question that process. But then within that structure, which unfortunately is how we're operating in the US context, a black box algorithm is being used to help determine whether people get locked in a cage or not. And ProPublica, an investigative news organization in the US, did an investigation, and they found that the risk scores are deeply racist. In other words, they overpredict the likelihood of black people reoffending and underpredict the likelihood of white people reoffending. So if you're black, you're more likely to be given a high threat score, and that means that you're more likely to be held before you've even had a trial in a jail, in a prison, in a cage. And that's one example of how the harms of algorithmic decision-making systems are being distributed unequally, in this case according to race and gender, because black men are the most overpredicted in that system. But that's a lens for analysis that we could use to think about all automated decision-making systems. So if we later, when we wander around this hall, and we're going to look at a lot of people promising to use large data sets to make predictions which should be useful in helping to govern a city, we need to think through a lens of design justice about how the benefits and burdens, the risks and harms of automated decision-making systems, ADS, are unequally distributed according to the logics of race, class, gender, and ability, and so on. So it's a way of analyzing systems, design systems, interfaces, and so on. But it's also a community of practice. So Design Justice Network is a community of people who have really emerged out of a space called the Allied Media Conference. You can go to designjustice.org and learn a little bit more about our history. But basically, back in 2015, a group of about 30 people who are designers of different kinds got together at Allied Media Conference, which is an amazing space. You should all go if you've... Has anyone been to Allied Media Conference? Pablo's been. Has anyone heard of Allied Media Conference? A handful of people. So I would say it's one of the most important spaces in the US context for people who are working at the intersection of social movement activity and media and cultural work. So it's people who are artists, activists, designers, musicians, dancers, filmmakers, web designers, and software developers, and also people who are involved in sort of policy, but through a lens of arts and culture as being a key component of how we create a vision for different kinds of worlds that we want to build. And it's been going on for about 20 years. It happens in Detroit every year, and it's a really key space for the development of new social movement networks and ideas about how to organize in the US. And back in 2015, a group of designers got together at Allied Media Conference and talked about what would it mean to take this field, or these fields that we're in that are allied with this overall concept of design, and think about it through a social justice lens and a movement building lens. And that was the beginning of the Design Justice Network. So here's an image from one of those early meetings. This is Wes Taylor. This is Carlos. Other people who've been on the steering committee include Una Lee, Victoria Barnett, who came, Victoria and Wes came here to meet with Design Justice Network Mediterranea node. When was it? When? Yeah, just very recently. And so basically, we have been, we developed a set of principles, which we're going to share with you now. We've run a series of network gatherings at the Allied Media Conference over the last few years. That expanded into a track at AMC, which includes, you know, the last one was over 100 people, all providing skill shares and workshops to share knowledge about what it means to do design justice work together. And there are now local nodes forming in many different places. So Toronto has one of the most active nodes. And in Toronto, they're fighting the Google's Sidewalk Labs, which is this project. So Google is trying to buy a portion of the waterfront property in the city of Toronto and create a vision, their vision of the corporate-owned smart city. And Toronto housing activists are fighting back against that. And the Design Justice node in Toronto is part of that. Oh, here's an image from the Mediterranea meetup. There's a new node forming in Singapore, which I just learned about 2 days ago. Philadelphia is pretty active. So basically there are nodes popping up in different places who are inspired by these principles and are trying to figure out what it means to put them in practice in different local contexts. And now I'm just going to share the principles with you before I hand off the mic, and then after that we'll get into the hands-on activity. These principles were developed by many people over the last 3 years, 4 years. They were developed at that first meeting, then revised, and then released 2 years ago as a, they're still a living document, but we think it's a pretty good encapsulation of some of the core ideas we're working with. And they've now been signed by close to 400 individual designers and design shops that who they resonate with. So let's just read them out, and then we'll get into them. So principle 1, we use design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities, as well as to seek liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems. So we wanted to get out there at the very beginning that design justice is a lot more explicit than some frameworks that you might see floating around there, like design for good, or civic design, or human-centered design, or even participatory design, which all have their own legacies and histories, and many of us in the Design Justice Network are also part of those communities, and there's a lot of good work that happens under those frameworks, but also none of those frameworks are explicit about the, are you trying to challenge oppressive systems or not? Are you trying to dismantle white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and settler colonialism? Well, you might not be if you're just doing human-centered design. You might just be trying to build an interface to help you suck up more data to train your machine learning system. So that's principle 1. Principle 2, we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of a design process. Again, we center those who are directly impacted. And this is because a lot of design is happening in a technocratic milieu where people are basically saying, I can design a system that is going to be really user-friendly, right? And that might be true, but are the people that are most impacted at the table when thinking about, do you want to build this thing at all? Do you want to build this in the first place? So for example, you could build a recidivism risk prediction algorithm that was really easy to use for a judge, and that might be human-centered design, but you wouldn't be centering the people who are most directly impacted by the outcome of that design process, right? And that's related to the next principle. We prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. So impact over intentions. And this comes from anti-oppressive frameworks, anti-racist frameworks, right? So because we all grow up in these systems of structural and historical oppression, and our educational system is developed through them, and our media system, and even our families, we learn to reproduce these systems in daily micro interactions. And so even though we might be well-meaning, we might still cause harm to others. And so that's why in design justice, we prioritize the impact over the intentions of the designer. This room, this space, I mean, some of the companies in here are literally just like evil companies that know exactly what they're doing and want to do harm to people, but most of them believe that they're doing something really good, right? They have good intentions. They want to have a good impact on the world. They want cities to function more smoothly. but they may not be working with those most harmed by the development of smart city systems. And so in design justice, we prioritize the impact on the most vulnerable people over the good intentions of the designer, whether the designer is coming from the private sector or from a government or even from a social movement context or an NGO. Principle 4, we view change as emergent from an accountable, accessible, and collaborative process rather than a point at the end of a process, right? So we're not most interested in just shipping the perfect product. We're interested in, was the process that you used to decide what it is that you're building inclusive? Was it just? Was it collaborative? Was the community that is going to be most impacted involved, rather than just the outcome, right? And in that sense, Principle 5, we see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't think that designers might not have designerly expertise. We do, right? Like if you've spent a lot of time, learning how to use GIS tools or systems, or you've spent a lot of time, you pride yourself on your ability to build very usable interfaces, that's good, and you have expertise in a particular professional domain. But in the context of design justice, we're interested in how designers can facilitate collaborative processes that include communities and put our expertise kind of at the service of community-led design processes. Because Principle 6 is that we believe that everyone is an expert based on their own lived experience, and we all have unique and brilliant contributions to bring to the design process. So we could return to our recidivism algorithm design idea again and say, well, we might come up with something very, very different if we included people who had been incarcerated in our attempts to design systems for community safety, right? So instead of developing better algorithms that are less racist, we might say, why is what we're doing funding increased surveillance and police activity and hotspot crime detection and predictive policing and risk assessments that city managers can use? Why aren't we figuring out how communities have been harmed historically and currently, and what resources are needed so that people can have other options than to commit violent crimes or acts, right? So what is the lived experience of vulnerable communities going to tell us about the overall systems shifts that we need? Principle 7 is that we share design knowledge and tools with our communities. So in the Design Justice Network, rather than constantly try and position ourselves as intermediaries or people that, must be at the table to lead a design process, we might have skills and experience and we can support community activity. But also part of that support involves ensuring that whatever skills and tools people need to do their own design work is going to be developed and shared. Principle 8 is related to the previous principle. That's that we work towards sustainable, community-led, and controlled outcomes. So in contrast to a lot of design practice, which is about parachuting, even well-meaning design that's about parachuting into a community, and I'm going to solve your problem for you. That's sort of like a techno-solutionist, savior mentality. In the Design Justice Network, we're less interested in that, and we're more interested in how do we support already existing community processes to deal with systematic oppression that communities are fighting. And Principle 9 is that we work towards non-exploitative solutions that reconnect us to the earth and to each other. Right? So this space that we're in now, it's full of systems and tools that are about a top-down techno-utopian managerial vision of what a smart city looks like, which is that experts who are city managers empowered by big data sets are going to make services more efficient for city residents who are reimagined as neoliberal subjects or consumers of corporate services, because the cities aren't even going to do these things themselves. They're just going to contract the companies that are here. That's why most of the people who are here is to sell their companies' products to city governments through bidding, non-competitive bidding, whatever. And so we're interested in how do we design and develop solutions that reconnect us to each other, and that also don't continue to harm, damage, and destroy the Earth. Because we're not going to have smart cities if we've created ecological collapse, right? Okay. And our final principle, principle 10, is that before seeking new design solutions, we look for what's already working at the community level. We honor and uplift traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge and practices. And again, this goes against the idea of techno-solutionism, narratives of development, and increasingly narratives of design, because Arturo Escobar, the Colombian anthropologist and designer, has written a wonderful book called Designs for the Pluriverse, where he's interested in how, whereas in the past, development was a term that was many people used to talk about how basically the systems of the global north are need to replace all indigenous knowledge systems, right? Without saying it that way. And that then there was a critique of development and a backlash against that. And so Arturo Escobar says that design is replacing development as a new sort of colonial term to impose what he calls the one world ontology, or the single vision of how you do things right, that destroys and erases indigenous life worlds and ways of understanding the world and being in the world. And so we're interested in what are already existing solutions, and how can those be amplified and made more visible, rather than saying we're going to use machine learning to figure out the one correct way to model and organize a city, and then erase other ways of being. So those are the principles. They've been signed onto by many people and organizations now. And next, before we get into the hands-on activity, we're going to learn more about how these principles are being taken up and reimagined in the context of the Mediterranea node.
Okay. So hi, I'm Elena. Yeah, I'm coming here to tell you a bit about the Mediterranean experience that we just started of the network. Literally a month ago, we had the first meetup. We gathered a few people around. We met through the magic of the internet. I met these beautiful individuals on the other side of this panel through the internet, and then found out we were all incredibly inspired by this set of principles, and it really resonated with our experiences. But obviously, our experiences are situated, our geographies are not just physical, but also, political. Our imaginary practices are really local. So we started dreaming together of what a Mediterranean node of this would look like. And we chose the Mediterranean word and not the European word on purpose. In a sense that we really wanted to reclaim this geography, not as in opposition to a concept of fortress Europe, and really trying to tackle and come together to talk about Mediterranean identity, and really situate our experiences into what's happening around the Mediterranean. And that means many things. That means the crisis of racism and migration that is happening around the Mediterranean. That means the in Barcelona context, what's happening in Catalonia, what's happening with state surveillance and repression of protests, what's happening in the rise of fascism throughout Europe. So that's many of the things which we are discussing together, and we're really looking forward to discussing with other people about. At the moment, the people that came together, we were from Italy, from the Spanish state, from Malta, and we're trying to build more connections across the Mediterranean, right? So obviously that meant in the first encounter that we had in Pisa, thanks to the support of the Internet Festival organizers, we've been able to come together there, but that meant affording travel to come together. So we're really trying to do an intentional collaborations and networking with the Northern African region, with the Balkans, with Greece. So that's an ongoing effort and intention we have. So we really invite more people to join us and come together and discuss what this means in our theory, but also in our practice. What we really want is to join forces in this really scary times that we're living, and across a number of practices and fields and disciplines, because we all do different things. I do participation methodologies, UX, research, tech development. We all do very different things, but we come together, and that's probably one of our strengths in this. We launched on the website of Design Justice Network the report of what we've been doing in Pisa, so you can read more about it. And you can also have our email address to get in touch with us, which is djn-med@cryptolab.net. And you can obviously sign the principles and get in touch with us, because we really would like to talk to you. Yeah!
Great. And the last thing is where we come from, and the Design Justice. As many of you already know, that we have been doing some experiments, and I would like Marta to explain a couple of them. Mayo, myself, Elena, we were all mixed, and that was the moment in which we fell in love with Design Justice. And I mean, just a brief, and the principles translated in Spanish.
Thank you very much. I want to talk to you a little bit about how we use the design justice principles in 2018 and 2019 in the context of the several biennales that we had in Barcelona. First, the Biennale Ciutat Oberta, that was focused on thinking about how we can transform the city into a more open space for thinking and for local practices. And the second was the Biennale of Science. That was how we can start a dialogue between science and the city. So we can propose transformative action, like in both contexts. And I want to start with the Biennale Ciutat Oberta, because we used design justice because the challenge was so great. So Mayo, that was the curator and organizer of one of the tracks of the Biennale, thought about opening the nomenclator, which is like a Latin name to describe the book where all the names of the streets of a city is listed. So we took this nomenclator, Thais was organizing the activity as well. We take the nomenclator to try to think first from a gender perspective, but then we thought that it would be more interesting to take an intersectional approach. And design justice was the analytical tool that provided us to have like a really deep intersectional approach to the question of what's happening with the nomenclator. Because of course gender is like such an easy thing to see, you know, like there's only 30% of names of women in the city of Barcelona, but not was like less than 40%, but from this 40%, 30% was just virgins. So yeah, we have a few women in Barcelona, in the streets of Barcelona, but they're like mythological creatures, virgins and so. And then we were questioning what's the story that the city is telling through the names of their streets. And we realized that they were telling a story of white supremacy and colonialism. Because when you pull the threads of the names of the streets, we realized that like around 300 names, street names in Barcelona had something to do with Antonio López, which was one of the greatest colonizers that we had in the city. And we also saw that Antonio López was described as a businessman in the database. It was not a colonizer. It was not even from a military perspective. It was described as businessman. So that gave us like analytical tools to see what is normally left out when we are analyzing something from feminist perspectives, at least in Europe, because it's like quite easy to fall into the white feminist perspective that it's not quite helpful. So design justice was a really, really helpful tool to help us dealing with the complexity, you know, like of analyzing like this big book of street names in a city that is like, has like such a historical root. And the second Biennale, we were just more brave than in the Biennale before, and it was like, okay, so let's just take design justice and went full in. And we use design justice not just as an analytical tool, but also like as a device that help us design the event. And we try to make a mock-up of a parliamentary session, but instead of having political parties, we had like the the axis of the design justice matrix of domination. So instead of having the left, the right, the green, the whatever, we had like parties just looking at the different axes of the matrix of domination to analyze policy making and to try to improve policy making. And from that activity, this fanzine came out, where we translated the design justice principles in Spanish and in Catalan, and we tried to provide a little bit of background because, of course, from some people to think about colonialism, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy may be like a little bit confusing at the beginning, so we tried to create a little fanzine to make like these ideas a little bit more approachable for people that maybe not so much familiarized. That was like a really, really amazing event because if first Design Justice was putting together Mayo, Thais, and me, then with the Biennale event, Elena came, and suddenly it was like, we are also excited about this methodology and we want to do something like to carry on, like this thinking. And that was, like through the work of the Biennales, like the work that Mayo started, that Thais helped organize, that I helped, like provide some thinking, that finally, like the Design Justice network with the Mediterranean node came to life. And I think that speaks tones about how, like human relations and at least your desire to take responsibility of your actions as designer and to remember that good actions are not enough, that you have to be responsible for all the mistakes that you do as a designer, that launch, like this desire of doing better. And that's what we're trying to continue here to do, like this desire to do better altogether. And I hope that we will be able to learn something today altogether. Well, here you can have a short view of what was the fanzine organized. First, we have like, first we have like this little explanation about the design justice principles. And then we have, if you go down, we chose ableism as well as one of the intersections of oppression that we thought that it was interesting to think about when we are thinking about policy making, like how ableism is also like really, really embedded in policy making, that it's not thought about from an intersectional perspective. And then we invite Dimmons because it's one of the most important nodes of thinking in Barcelona about commons and about how to thinking about from a commons perspective to try to put together all the important sources for us that were, like in place in this kind of research questions. And we also gather all our favorite authors to inform on the Matrix of Domination axis. And this, you can download it. It's in Catalan, it's in Spanish as well. And you can download it for the activity if you feel like, actually, if you go to, 3Ws, Liquen, like Liquen, datalab.com, and in the first project you will find a link to download the fanzine if you want to use it. And if you don't find it, just ask me and I will help you find it later. Thank you very much. And then I return the micro to my friends.
The activity is coming.
Okay. Okay, so we have the activity. We really want to get into it, but should we get into it before we, or should we see if people want to talk at all or have questions first, or should we get right into it? Yeah. So, okay, maybe if anyone has a burning question right now or a comment, we could take like a couple minutes to do that, but we will have more time for conversation after the hands-on activity, so we do want to get to that. Does anyone have like a burning question or comment right now? Going once. Going twice. Okay, let's get active. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to, in small groups of 2 or 3 people, and I guess all of us who are up here, we're each gonna lead one group. So some of the groups might even just be, 2 people. No, two or three people. And we're going to have 10 minutes to go out into this beautiful space around us. And what we're going to do is we want each of you to look over the design justice principles, which are up here on the screen. You can also find them on designjustice.org. If you just go to designjustice.org on your mobile device or your laptop, and then you just scroll down on that homepage, that's where we are right now. It's just down the page. And take a couple minutes and pick one of the principles that you like a lot, that resonates with you. And after you've picked a principle, you're going to go travel with your team, and you have 10 minutes to wander around the space and find and bring back here an image. Like, it could be a flyer or a poster, or it could be a picture that you take on your cell phone. It could be an object that they give you at one of the booths. And we want you to find something that really goes against that principle, or maybe that really supports it. So we're going to go out and do some field research on basically what's the relationship between the design justice principles and the way that smart cities are being imagined in this expo space here. Do the types of projects people are promoting in the expo, to what degree do they support these principles, and where do they challenge them or take away from them or go directly against them? So does anyone have any questions about what the activity is? Pretty clear? So check out the principles and pick one that you like, or just that speaks to you. And then grab a group of 2 or 3 people, and you're going to wander around together and find a poster, a pamphlet, a flyer, or take a picture of something that you think relates to that principle, that supports it or takes away from it. So let's do it. We have 10 minutes, and it's 10:30 now. So we want to be back here at 10:40. Okay? So grab all of us are going to one of us is going to go with each group. So come up here and grab one of us, and then we'll go with you around the space.
Who wants this one?
Hello. Check 1, 2. Check 1, check 1, 2. Ok, vamos a empezar de nuevo. Si estás participando en el taller de Design Justice, por favor regresen al Stand Lab, donde vamos a analizar los materiales que hemos encontrado. Ok. ¿Hay otro grupo? ¿Estamos esperando a otra persona? O creo que vamos a empezar. Y si más personas llegan, pues llegan. Bueno, ojalá que eso ha sido. Oh, in English. So I hope this has been interesting. I know our group found some very interesting materials and had some good conversations with people. What we want to do now is actually just a chance to share back, and we want to open it up as well. So we're just going to pass the mic, and we're looking for people to share back. Just, maybe just say your name, the principle that you were focusing on, and then tell us a little bit about the material that you have, and we can pass and share the materials while we go. So does anyone want to begin? ¿Quieren empezar?
Okay, so we were going around. Sorry, I'm Jorge. I'm a colleague of Elena, but but I'm not involved in the Design Justice project with her. So I'm here to see more about this lab that is and the network, the Mediterranean network, and yes, we focus on the 9th principle, the one about not anti-exploitation and reconnecting us to the earth. So, and basically what we're seeing all around us is against all of this, I would say, because, also, I come from the design field of studies as an architect, and I'm very skeptical sometimes about the smart cities and all these technologies. So basically, we saw some mock-ups of the cities of future, and there's only buildings. There's no, there's no earth, not even a park, a fake park. It's only buildings. So. And as far as we know, the 40% of the pollution in the world is made out of us building more buildings. So that's a lot of pollution comes from this field, and we are still thinking about how to be smart by building more and be more, living more in in cities with less nature. At least this is the impression that you have going around this Fira. So there was this this big maquette of Shanghai port and how and some other new cities in China. Yes. So I don't know. I mean. It was my friend Marta that picked this principle. So, and in turn out it was very easy for me to find things against this, as I have this this lens of the skeptical architect, let's say. I can finish here because I said I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for sharing back. Let's try and get like a bunch of examples on the table before we get into deeper conversation about what we found. So maybe if a few more people want to kind of popcorn style just briefly share back what you found.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I'm doing a PhD with Mayo. We were going around and we find two interesting things. We find a lot, but I really like one because it's like a bar talk with beers and everything from the Tel Aviv stand, and they have a talk called "Digitalizing Your Mobile Workforce is as easy as making a gazpacho soup." and I was like really amazed by by this. I think it fits in all the principles. Like, it's incredible that they say this, surrounded by beers, of course, because I don't think that it's that easy. Another thing interesting that we found is we went to another stand that they are basically, there was a huge camera, and you were going around, and there was like the facial recognition, and they were saying that tracking these citizens going around the city, it wasn't better because they were able to improve the it's working. To improve the public transport. And of course, I don't think that here there is any kind of design inclusion and thinking about the impacts of this. So, well, I'm going to pass the photo, and that's it. And this one is the title of the talk.
So we went to a stand, and they have basically a robot that helps elderly to use their tablet. And so this is directly in competition with the idea that the grandchildren usually teach their grandparents how to use technology. So it was a bit weird. And the crazy thing is that, of course, the robot is very cute, and you only interact with the robots through motion, so it's not very hard. But the whole concept was a bit weird, no?
Yeah, we also found one that was like a predictive policing one, but this one was harder to analyze because it's supposed to be for good. It's supposed to help elders and young people, but it's about removing humans from caregiving positions and replacing them with these robots. And we tried to have a conversation with the vendors about, were older people involved in the design of the robots, but there was it was a Japanese vendor. There was too much of a language barrier for us, I think, to have a meaningful conversation about that. But we wanted to focus on the way that cuteness and a discourse of inclusion is not the same thing as principle 2, which is what we were focusing on, which is that people who are most impacted by a design are involved. So we center the voices of those directly impacted by the outcomes of a design process. So we don't know whether older people were involved in the design decision to say, I'd rather have a cute robot teach me how to use a smartphone, which was one of the technologies they were selling, than my grandchild. We suspect the answer would probably be no, but who else?
Okay. You don't want to stay.
Hi. So we were walking around. We also went to the robot, and were surprised by like every home a robot or something like that. Like basically saying that we should all embrace having a robot all over our homes. And we also went walking that way and end up seeing the Milestone stand, and they're basically selling like video content analytics, behavioral AI, cybersecurity, crowd people counter, managing and planning city traffic, detection of incidents, intelligent security cameras. So anything that could be related to controlling by video or controlling by image, which can be quite dangerous. And I guess principles from 1 to 4 are basically, well, I'm not sure if these technologies are designed to sustain, heal, or empower any community, or it doesn't seem that they're going to help center voices of people who are marginalized. So I wonder, especially like the crowd people counter, what could happen with like a protest or like a big manifestation, or if this was being used, for example, in Hong Kong right now, it could be a disaster. So I think it's a showcase of what could go very wrong. So I'll pass it around.
Okay. Okay, we found two experiences that I think both of them are with a very good intentions behind. One for how to find a better solution for refugees. It's a software to try to identify very fast where to find a house for a refugee. And it's important because it was from the government that, you know, the refugees coming and they are just saying, go, go, go there. And later they realize that these are high poverty areas and all of that, and they were just helping that. But it was quite a long conversation with Marta and the developers of the software, and it was interesting. Found something related to that not really the voice of the refugees are listening here for terms of reasons of privacy, especially like a privacy something, and it's quite difficult that the developers talk to the refugees and the refugees really told them they are using like an intermediate, like it's from the government, and then in that point it's interesting to see that maybe there is a good reason why it's not the voice of the people hearing in that context that they need, but and how much of the position of the government is really giving the right information. There are many questions behind that, but it's an interesting platform. To our focus it was especially in the principle 1 and 2, and when the voices are really heard in this kind of processes, and especially in this kind. And the second one, it was just our neighbor that is designing a process for mapping air quality in the streets. It means the idea that everybody could know which streets are more polluted or less polluted. And in this case, it's more for the kind of work what I was doing. They are using open source data, but they are not using data coming from the citizens that are using do-it-yourself devices because they consider that this is not a validate source. Then against thinking about the principle 2, and the idea of empower really people, and it's a system that they are telling information and not taking into account the people that the data that the people are gathering. Then in that case, both of them good intention, but with a way to improve definitely from this perspective.
I will circulate like this, where you will be able to see the migrant housing solution that Delatte is offering, which is like a little bit frightening. But I mean, we thought that this for sure is not seeking liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems. We can picture Delatte like making a priority to seek, like liberation from oppressive systems. If Delatte is like reproducing capitalism like in every inch that they move. But at least it's interesting to see how they pink wash everything, like trying to sell like this solution for migrant housing. So you can see here the papers.
Hello. My walk around has been going through the history of the Smart City Expo World Congress, actually. The Smart City Expo World Congress started only as an expo by companies. And I think I share the reflections about what we have found in the stands of companies. Then it says, okay, if it's a smart city, there should be also cities. So there started to be also stands by cities, and now there is 700 cities coming here, and it's the world more important congress of cities coming to here. And so I went to the Barcelona one, and I picked, so it's a progression that they are here, but still I picked the program about Barcelona digital policies, because actually the design of policies, it's without design. There is really, like, even the political science, like talk about design, analysis, and evaluation of public policies, but the design part is missing. You know, there is a little bit of participative democracy now in order to, through participative channels, to select the agenda of policies. But when the agenda is decided, how to implement those policies, how to design them, there is very limited involvement of citizens. So I thought of that. And then in the progression of the Smart City Expo World Congress, it was, okay, here there are companies, now there are cities, but a smart city without citizens, no? So it's a bit of the mode of this stand, the Sharing City stand, of trying to bring the quadruple elite and another type of bodies and subjects. And so here I found Wikipedia and Wikimedia. So I think this is also a good progression and important that Wikipedia is here. But still, in Wikimedia, there is a problem regarding the principles of design justice. If we look into the input of the insights of the Wikipedia, how it's designed to be a wiki collaborative, great. But if we look to the output, what happened, then we have 30% of women, then we have a wide majority of editors, content, and so a lot to do. But still, we are moving forward and in positive. Oh, I forgot to say one. Sorry. I went to Israel because last year, when we organized the Sharing City Summit, Belém was supposed to be here as part of the summit, and the delegates were not given permission to arrive here and participate in the summit. So I thought that we have to also take into account the geopolitical conflicts when we think about the smart city and how it affects.
Should we switch to the next part? Okay, so now that we got everybody in a critical mode, we actually have one more step in this exercise that we're doing here together. We thought it would be, in some ways, quite easy, and it can be fun to critique the dystopian hellscape that surrounds us. But in some ways, that's like a low-hanging fruit because there are so many terrible projects here. But even though they're represented often by very nice people, right? And that was part of our learnings too, is that you don't have to be a malicious person to participate in the discourse of designing and building a future that doesn't meet any of these principles, right? You could be a very nice person working at a booth, selling a technology, and still you're going to help reproduce the Matrix of Domination and destroy the planet. But what we wanted to do next is move from a pretty fun and simple critique to something a little more complicated and difficult, which is that within this space, Mayo has been involved in helping to organize the Sharing Cities platform, right? Which is people trying to, well, you should talk more about what it is, but in this next stage, what we're going to do is think together about in what ways do the design justice principles, if we look at the Sharing Cities platform through the lens of the design justice principles, is it holding up? What's missing? How can it be improved? Because it's one thing to critique projects that we see as sort of obviously counter to the values that many of us around this circle share, and it's another thing to turn that lens somewhat inward on processes that were supposed to be collaborative and participatory and about creating sharing cities in the future. So Mayo, do you want to share these and while these are going around, tell us a little bit more about the process that led to these before we get into it back in small groups again?
Thank you, Sasha. We are in a stand. It's called Sharing City Stamp Lab that came from the fact that last year it was celebrated at Sharing City Summit here, in which 50 cities agree on a set of principles regarding sharing cities and principles and commitments to be established by cities in order to assure a good sharing city and how to deal with the challenges and opportunities of the platform economy. This happened after a previous summit in Amsterdam and New York. So the cities are trying to see how to do together regarding the disruptive impact of platforms like Uber and Airbnb, which is putting in tension certain historical rights, like the right to access to housing or working rights in the case of Deliveroo or Uber. And the cities are the main territorial space where this platform economy is growing, and also where they are receiving this disruption. And many times this platform does not respect the local regulations, and so platforms wanted to come together to share experiences and also to empower between them to defend their sovereignty in front of these platforms. On the other hand, it was also there is also an opportunity perspective of how to these digital platforms, also connected with civic engagement, could facilitate the democratization of the economy, because with the digital platform transition from what used to be in the economic system, the central role of the fabrics as spaces of production. Now, with this migration into digital platforms as a central space of production in the emerging economical system, in this transition, what is happening is that the historical role of social and solidarity economy, the cooperativism, is having is scaling, because now we are seeing the emergency of digital platforms in a scale that we didn't know before, based on democratic principles of production. And so there is a very big, a very good opportunity of democratization of the economical system if the transition into the digital platforms is connecting to these more socially responsible models. The perspective of the sharing city was also not administrative centric, so not only cities, and this is why there was city representative meeting, but also it happened this stand. This stand is focused is based on the quadruple helix. So there are not only city representatives, but there is also businesses, platforms, research centers, civil society, and a plurality of actors. And also in the mode in which we gather here, which is you are not selling a product like in other stands, but here is about co-creation, something like in this event. So the principles, the first one has to do with the importance of differentiation between models and between platforms. Not all the platforms are the same. Digital platforms are replacing fabric, are becoming a key central point of production, but they can be very different. Something like with Uber or Airbnb is very different than something that's like Mobilidad, which is a platform cooperative around mobility sharing services, or Marta, which is a platform cooperative of 9,000 people in Belgium about mutualizing services by the the cultural freelance. So people who is very precarized, that they get together through a platform in order to be able to work in better conditions. So it's very important to differentiate between models and have present that there are actually models which are very positive and that can bring, as I say, a democratization of the economy and the cities to adapt their policies depending on if they are more democratic or not. Second, the importance of labor. So the importance of labor rights, inclusion, environmental sustainability, data sovereignty and citizens' digital right, city sovereignty, as I said, in front of the platforms who disrupted, and the importance of economical promotion policies and the development of the general interest. Those were the principles present in the declaration. Thank you.
So thank you, Mayo, for giving us the context for where these came from. And now what we're going to ask you to do is share these with a couple people, so get in small groups again of 3 or 4 people, and have a conversation. And if you can, maybe if one person could take some notes, that would be nice. On a laptop or with a pen or on your mobile, and just look at the principles that came out of this process that Mayo described, and think about, through the lens of design justice that we've just been working with today, how do these work? Is anything missing? Could they be strengthened or improved? Or maybe they're perfect principles. And so we have maybe 10 minutes 10 minutes for that part. So grab a couple people and take that critical lens and put it on a friendly project rather than an easy to attack target. Thank you.
Vale, shall we go back? Shall we go back in the circle? Yeah? So the invitation now is that we spend the last 10 minutes we have sharing with the others the discussions we had just had in the 4 little groups. So the idea is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 little groups that emerged. So if each group could have in 1 minute to sum up a bit of the conversation that we had, and then we can try and have a conversation. I know that time is limited, but that way we can have a contamination of experiences. So who took notes from this little group or wants to sum up the conversation?
Come on.
Hi again. So basically, we were focusing in the inclusive part, and we were being really critical with everything, saying that okay, this is a really good step. We have a lot of women here, but at the same time, we were saying that okay, if the purpose is really to have like the 4 helix actors, we have to take into account that also maybe we are not being that with gender. I think that it's a really good job, but maybe with race. With intersection, yeah, intersectionally not that much, no? So we can do even more. And also, for example, we are here and we have like a little bit, correct me if I'm saying something that you don't want to, that we are always like the same community, that it's very difficult to reach to the other ones, that the team tried it, but it's very difficult to really hack the other to go to the other spaces, and to say, okay, this is where we want also to have our voice here, no? And another thing where we were saying is that civil society is a lot of things, and despite the fact that the Sharing Cities team invited here a lot of people to participate and to let them voice be heard, they didn't come, some of them. So this is a pity, like. We also want them to be here and to have a voice, and to really these marginalized communities, the ones that are really affected, apart from us, that are really affected from this, like for example, careers or that are not being mobilized. This could be also a space to help them organize and to have an impact. That's it.
So we have discussed basically about 2 things. The first, like applying a decolonizing lenses all over the declaration to include, at least, well, we've been talking about like not only Western colonizing process, but as well like the Eastern colonizing process and how that can be reflected into thinking of labor, and especially we were discussing the 4th principle of inclusion and thinking that only inclusion without discussing reparation doesn't actually get there, right? That there's like at least half or another step or halfway to still make this actually have a difference, which is thinking about reparation or responsibility. So we think that these are other aspects that are very important as well, especially regarding inclusion and labor. And last thing we were kind of thinking is kind of when we think of labor, of course, this is going to be more or less for the citizen, right? Or for people who can actually access the labor market. But if we're thinking of a huge part of people that are in a lot of global north cities, they are not going to even be able to access the labor market. So, of course, very interesting principles as well concerning labor, but what about as well even being able to access jobs? So I guess sums up more or less what we were discussing. Thanks.
Okay, so very quickly, we had one thinking about staying critical in general, and that the thing is that all these principles in reality emerge from where we live and how we live today, right? And so even though probably some of these principles are universal, the way we express how to deal with them relates to what we're living now. So we have disparity in labor, we have disparity in gender, we have disparity. But then the big question will be, one, if we're good and we're not going to have those problems, how will these principles translate then, right? And so, and this is just to say, let's try to stay critical in any case, because sometimes principles stay a bit too fixed. And so we're just trying to we reinforce whatever that has already passed, so in a sense. And the second thing is that we need some tools that help us think in these ways, because these are high-level objectives, but then when we get to the discussions, it's really difficult to have something like this. So it's a challenge for design, and one of the things that also I'm trying to work on, but we need a lot of that. We're very used to even do these kind of things, which is speaking, and if we go into policy making, it's where I come from, it's even harder, because you have tables, you have a microphone, you cannot talk while I'm talking, and this is not really the best use of our time. So we need to really design new ways of interacting with each other. And so, yeah, that was basically a bit the summary.
Hello again. Looking through the principles of the Sharing Cities network, once again we found that there's no really connection to non-exploitative solutions and citizens reconnecting to Earth. There's only a mention in principle number 6 about environmental sustainability, but if you read through it, it turns out it's more about circular economy than really sustainability and reinforcing our relation with nature. Sorry. And I'm saying this because cities, again, is the place where the most of the pollution is done. I mean, it's not only mobility in the city, but everything. I mean, we pollute. So this is why I'm very focused. At the end, I was focused a lot on this principle. Not only because we don't need just to focus about circular economy and reducing consume of materials, but also to reinvert this trend, because in the last 50 years and the last century of urban development, we have damaged a lot of the nature around our cities. And in our cities, we also have rivers, we have water for our ports, and I hope we still have parks in the future. So again, this is why it immediately came to our eyes that there's no relation between the Declaration of Sharing Cities and the Principle 9 of the Design Justice.
Okay, I don't think we have time to contaminate comments, but I think Thais has a suggestion for us.
No, I only wanted to thank you all for being here, sharing with all of us your knowledge, your time, and your points of views, and the glasses that we were talking. That the objective of this session was to put on the Design Justice glasses and to see reality with it. So in this sense, I was inviting you to participate in an action that is going to take this afternoon place here in the smart city, because what we are going to do is get out of this island, which is the the communities, living people in the cities are represented in this stand, but we're going to get out of this stand and we're going to cross the Smart City Expo and probably claim for more inclusive and sharing cities, not only in this fair, in the Smart City Expo, but also in their real day-to-day actions. So you are all invited. We will all march to
So what
claim
happens?
this.
We're meeting here at 4?
Yes. We are meeting here at 4. Bring your...
And then we're doing what? We're going demonstrating
Yes,
against...
and we will fix what the tour is, but yes, we need to, yes. Bueno, in Spanish we say a conga. For the ones who do not know what a conga is, you're invited to come here at 4 o'clock and you will see what a conga is. And that's it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sasha. I don't know if Mayo, do you want to close up saying something? No? Okay, so thank you very much for all of you coming here. Marta, do you want to say something? No? Okay. Bueno, you have to sign the design principle manifesto, and if you want to get in touch with us, with the Mediterranean ones, there is an email over there. You can join us. Just email us. Okay? Thank you.